She said it as she adjusted my collar, her fingers brushing the edge of my lapel with mechanical grace. "I need a real man." There was no venom in her tone, only finality, like someone naming a file before dragging it to the trash. She smoothed the fabric once more, stepped back to evaluate me like a display piece, and smiled faintly. "I will see you inside," she added, already walking away. I remained on the sidewalk for several seconds after she disappeared into the venue. Not stunned, not broken. Anchored, her words had not been spontaneous. They had been selected. She wanted them to echo in my mind as I watched her perform. And I did. I followed 10 minutes later, my presence unnoticed by her as she circulated the gallery space, all clean lines and curated charm. She was in her element, her smile practiced, her posture precise. I stood near the back wall and watched her speak to a woman I recognized only from digital press, Nadine Loring, a fund manager known for positioning creative female leadership as both a cause and an asset. They stood close, not romantic, but deliberate. Nadine laughed softly and touched her arm as they looked over a sculptural installation about emergent autonomy. The irony was so layered I nearly missed the title placard. Later that evening, after her brief panel appearance on navigating creative tensions, I listened as she responded to an audience question about her evolution from partnership into solo work. "Sometimes," she said, her voice even and warm, "you realize that being supported is not the same as being seen, and that is when clarity begins." Polite applause followed. Her eyes never searched the crowd. She believed I had stayed home, nursing whatever she imagined those words would ignite. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the space once, then left without touching the catered wine or the gallery's promotional handout bearing her name. At home, I placed the unopened handout beside an envelope already half-filled, business documents, brand decks, licensing agreements, each bearing my name as co-creator, each recently re-released under hers alone. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had shifted. She wore soft neutrals and poured coffee into my favorite mug without being asked. "You slept well, I hope," she said, her voice gentle. I nodded and sipped. "Well enough." She gave a small smile and leaned against the counter. "You seem lighter these days." I let the silence hold, let her look at me without realizing she was being studied. She had thrown her line into the current and assumed its lack of resistance meant it had disappeared. But my stillness was not compliance. It was calibration. That afternoon, I reviewed our company's client interface logs. A curious edit had been made on one of our oldest partnership bios. My name had been removed from the Founders section, replaced with vague phrasing, early collaborative input from legacy team. I traced the change to a submission IP in a parking space we had never used. The name on the profile, M Strategy, her initials, her phrasing, her tone. I cross-referenced the profile against a recently registered domain. The landing page was sparse, elegant, with muted palettes and abstract language. It claimed lineage through creative resilience forged under silent constraint. There was no mention of me. The following evening, I stood across from her in our kitchen as she stirred sauce over a pan, her voice light with small talk about a networking brunch Nadine had invited her to. "She has this incredible way of reading people," she said, her back to me. "She said I carry calm under pressure. That not many people can wear restraint like dignity." I responded with a neutral hum and began slicing bread. The rhythm steadied me more than the wine she poured later, unprompted as we sat across from one another. "You know," she said after a few minutes, "I think you're turning a corner." I set down my glass. "Which corner would that be?" she smiled. "Letting go. You are not holding everything so tightly anymore." There it was, the preview of her story. She would not say I failed. She would say I faded, that she grew while I quieted, that her emergence was not betrayal but necessity. I nodded once. "Perhaps I am." She believed my agreement confirmed her version, but I was not agreeing, I was marking. The next day I met privately with our legal audit advisor. I presented 3 items, the rebranded IP deck, the client interface change, and the gallery program featuring her solo biography. He reviewed each one silently before looking up. "Are you seeking legal protections or exposure?" he asked. "Neither," I said. "Not yet." He studied my expression. "Then what? Mapping." That evening she arrived home with a bottle of champagne, not for a celebration, for optics. Nadine is considering a major platform push, she said as she poured. She believes I could lead the female founder segment. I raised an eyebrow. Solo, her smile did not falter. That is how the public sees it now. It is cleaner. I nodded. Clarity helps. She toasted the air between us. To new narratives. I clinked her glass without comment. I already knew Nadine was more than an investor. I had reviewed the metadata on a shared folder between M Strategy and Loring Collective. Inside were not just strategy files. There were travel logs, private dinner confirmations, and a personal thank you note written in language far warmer than professional praise. But I had not printed it yet, because I was waiting for her to tell the story first. 3 days later, I scheduled a lunch meeting with a mutual contact, someone Elise believed to be loyal to her, someone whose silence she had counted on. I asked a single question over coffee. Have you heard of M Strategy? The man hesitated just long enough to answer me. He glanced down at his cup. Only in the context of Elise's evolution. She mentioned it as a way to claim space, to reframe her contributions. I nodded slowly. Did she mention the timeline? She said it had been in development for over a year, he replied, avoiding my eyes. I assumed you were involved. I thanked him and paid the bill. Outside the cafe, I stood beneath the shadow of a glass tower where we had once pitched together. The building had not changed, but the plaque in the lobby no longer carried our firm's name. It had been replaced 6 months ago, the same quarter Elise first met Nadine at a leadership summit. That evening, she brought home fresh flowers. Set them on the table like an offering, cooked an old favorite, seared scallops, seasoned with the exact blend I had once taught her. She poured wine, dimmed the lights, and asked what I was working on. Just revisiting some origin materials, I said. She smiled. Nostalgia suits you. You seem softer lately. I returned the smile. It is good to remember what belongs where. Her eyes flicked up for a beat, then drifted back to her plate. Later that night, she sat in her home office under warm lamplight, humming quietly as she scrolled through her tablet. I walked past the doorway without stopping. She never looked up, but the device she used to sync her files had automatically backed up a folder I accessed earlier that afternoon. Inside, draft content for a press interview, one scheduled under strict embargo with a publication known for profiling resilience pioneers. The headline preview read, "How I Survived Creative Control and Reclaimed My Voice." The article described a stifling environment of perfectionism. The tone was soft, clinical. My name did not appear, but it did not have to. Her descriptions, creative partner turned critic, a voice that dominated even silence, a collaborator who became a curator of fear, were not vague. They were veiled accusations dressed in sympathy. I forwarded the file to a separate encrypted drive. Then I closed the device, placed it back exactly where I found it, and left the room. The next day, I received a notification from a media monitoring service I had subscribed to months earlier. M Strategy had been added as a listed entity under Loring Collective's Emerging Ventures portfolio. The blurb named Elise as founder. The copy described the agency as the product of one woman's determination to reclaim narrative and rewrite inherited boundaries. Still, I said nothing. That weekend, she suggested a quiet getaway, just us. We could use the distance, she said, her tone gentle. No noise, no calendar, just air. I tilted my head. To recharge or to record it as such, she laughed lightly. You always say the most cinematic things. I gave her no answer. She booked the trip anyway. 2 days before departure, I called a private investigator I had used once before for corporate due diligence. I gave him 2 names, Nadine Loring, Elise Monroe. I asked for a focus not on finance but on proximity. Shared travel, lodging, bookings that suggested more than partnership. He called back within 36 hours. She has stayed at Loring's apartment 3 times in the past quarter, he said plainly. Different cities, same booking trail, shared ride services, shared reservations, nothing booked as business travel. I did not respond immediately. He added, there are photos, nothing overt, but clearly beyond professional context. I requested them, not to confirm what I already knew, but to control its form. They arrived that evening, time-stamped, high resolution. One showed them exiting a boutique hotel side by side, Elise's hand brushing Nadine's back in a gesture far too familiar for networking. Another showed them at a rooftop bar, heads close together, Nadine's gaze locked on her with something far from strategic interest. No change needed, this line is emotionally safe and clean. She had not simply rewritten our origin. She had added an entire subplot, a romantic narrative woven into a platform built on misrepresented harm. And I understood then that this was not about affection. It was about architecture. She had built her new identity on the framework of surviving me. That night, she poured wine and lit candles. Her playlist was soft piano, emotionally neutral. She wore a long, linen wrap I had seen once before, during our last anniversary dinner. She looked at me from across the table. "You have been steady lately. I think it is helping us." I met her eyes. "I am preparing for what comes next." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I stood and refilled her glass. "It means I am making sure every thread is traceable." She smiled softly. "That sounds like something you would say when you are starting to let go." I returned her smile. "Or when I am starting to close the loop." She said nothing after that. But her expression held longer than it used to. Not confusion, not fear, recognition. I was not retreating. I was finishing. 2 days before we were supposed to leave for the weekend trip she had proposed, I contacted a legal consultant specializing in narrative liability and professional misrepresentation. I explained the situation with no emotional flourishes. I presented the photos, the press draft, the LLC registration, and the branded decks lifted directly from our original work. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he asked only one question. "What is your desired outcome?" I did not answer immediately. "Then, control." He nodded. "Then timing is everything. You need to let her finish the story." I thanked him and scheduled a follow-up for 1 week after our return. That Friday, we drove to the coast. The property she chose was understated: high ceilings, linen drapes, white walls meant to mimic clarity. She unpacked methodically. 3 books, each about healing, 2 bottles of organic wine, 1 scented candle labeled Release. She handed me a glass before dinner. "I think we needed this." I swirled the wine slowly. "We will see." She laughed lightly, not expecting affirmation. The next morning she stood barefoot on the balcony, sipping tea as if she had already moved into this quieter version of her life. She turned as I stepped outside. "You seem relaxed here," she said. "I am always relaxed when people stop pretending." She turned back toward the ocean. "That sounds like a beginning." Later that afternoon, she asked if I would take a few photos of her for content collateral. She posed against soft backdrops, her gaze half-angled, her smile thoughtful. I adjusted the lens, said nothing. The poses matched a preview shot I had seen on her agency's internal brand guide, a series labeled Vision After Survival. Each image would be used to reinforce her central claim, that she had escaped not a man, but a dynamic, that her pivot had been from suffocation into breath. But I had already mapped the coordinates of her new persona, and I had tagged every location where it contradicted reality. That evening she sat across from me on the deck, wrapped in the same cardigan she wore during our first company retreat. She reached out and touched my hand softly. "I want you to know," she said, "this new chapter does not erase what we had." Her voice was sincere, polished, a closing argument written to absolve the speaker. I studied her face. "Do you believe what you are building is honest?" She blinked once. "It is true to how it felt." "That is not the same as truth." She withdrew her hand slowly. "Perception is its own reality." There it was, the foundation of her defense. Not deception, interpretation, not falsified harm, reframed discomfort. She believed that because she had felt unseen, she was permitted to retell every detail through the lens of resilience. And because she had been composed while doing so, she expected that no one would question the story. But I had the original drafts. I had the co-authored files, the messages praising our balance, the mutual strategy notes signed in her own hand. And I had begun preparing a dossier not to publish but to present, quietly, strategically. On our last morning she asked me to take one more picture, a wide shot with the sea behind her and the caption pre-written. "This is what reclaiming calm looks like." I framed the shot, captured the moment, saved it to a folder labeled Architect. That evening I received a discreet call from a mutual client who had once considered us a model partnership. His voice held an edge of confusion. I saw an article draft. It was sent over for background review. Elise is naming herself as sole founder. I asked what the piece implied. That she created the brand, that your role was operational, that she endured creative repression. I waited a beat. Does she name it that way? No, but it is threaded through everything. The language is curated. I thanked him and ended the call. That night as we packed, she hummed softly while folding her clothes. Her hands moved with calm certainty. I feel like we turned a page, she said. I zipped the suitcase without looking at her. You will need the whole book soon, she laughed. That sounds like a threat. I met her gaze. That sounds like a mirror. She tilted her head, smiled again, but the curve of it did not reach her eyes. She knew. I had let her stage every line. I had allowed her to build the script uninterrupted. But she had forgotten what happens when the silent character walks into the center of the frame, not with anger, not with protest, but with proof. We returned from the coast to a house that felt sharper, not colder, that would imply feeling. What I felt now was calibration. Every object in its place, every file in its folder, every sentence ready to be replayed for clarity, not comfort. 2 days later, I received the official email from the editorial team publishing Elise's profile. A courtesy preview sent to both our shared account and her agency's inbox. A glitch caused by old contact syncing she had forgotten to disable. The subject line read, Final Approval M Strategy Feature. The article was titled, Reclaiming Voice, One Woman's Rise from Creative Erasure. Her narrative was fully intact, her image in soft light. Pull quotes centered around agency, emergence, and what she called the quiet cost of male collaboration. Nowhere in the piece was I named, but the silhouette they traced was mine. I forwarded the preview to my legal consultant with no message. He responded an hour later with a question. Would you like to counter or document? Document, I wrote. I did not want headlines. I wanted legal positioning. That afternoon, I filed a private request for formal review with our licensing registry, including 3 origin declaration affidavits with digital fingerprints confirming authorship of the frameworks now attributed solely to her. The system acknowledged the submission with a reference code and timestamp. That evening, she brought home sushi. She set the containers down in the center of the table, then leaned against the counter with folded arms. There is going to be a small press bump tomorrow, she said, her tone even. Nothing big, just a profile piece. I nodded. Congratulations. She tilted her head slightly. You are very calm. You would prefer I perform confusion, she smiled faintly. I would prefer you support it. Support a version where I was not there. She walked to the sink, rinsed her hands slowly, and said nothing. After dinner, she poured herself a drink and curled into the corner of the couch with her tablet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the soft light reflect off her screen. I read the piece, I said. She paused. I assumed you would. I stepped into the room. You know the attribution is verifiable. She set the tablet down carefully. That was not the point of the story. No, the point was to shift from truth to narrative. She met my gaze, and for a moment something flickered across her expression. Not regret, not doubt, calculation. You always needed things to be measurable, she said. This is emotional terrain. No, I said, this is professional misrepresentation. She exhaled once through her nose. Do what you have to do. And there it was. The mask dropped without shatter. She did not deny. She did not retreat. She granted me permission to hold her accountable because she believed the truth had less reach than the story. What she had not calculated was the chain I had already set in motion. The following morning, I received a confirmation from the licensing board. They had flagged M Strategy's attribution for review. The notice was standard, bureaucratic, and exactly what I needed. 2 hours later, an associate from Loring Collective reached out, not Nadine, but her operations director. He requested a background clarification on Elise's early work, citing discrepancies in source material. I responded with polite detachment. Attached a brief package, dates, files, agreements. No commentary, no emotional flourishes. That evening, Elise sat beside me on the couch again, unaware of the shift in current. I am speaking at a founder's brunch next month, she said, her tone light. Nadine says I should tell the full story this time. I kept my voice measured. You should. She studied me for a moment. You are difficult to read lately. I am not trying to be read, she nodded slowly. That used to be part of the problem. No, I said, that used to be the safeguard. The next day, a private message arrived from a senior advisor at the publishing outlet. He wanted to delay the article release. New information, he said, warranted a deeper look at the story's claims. He had spoken to Loring's team. And suddenly, Elise's ascent was not being questioned by me. It was being questioned by the very platform she had used to stage her evolution. By the end of that week, Elise's agency page went offline for 12 hours. When it returned, the section that had once described her as sole creator of the foundational frameworks had been revised. The language now cited collaborative roots and early-stage input from a previous partner. My name still did not appear, but the omission had shifted from erasure to evasion. That was confirmation enough. I did not say anything when she came home that night. She moved with her usual calm, but I saw it, her gaze scanning my face more than the room, her questions casual in tone but laced with a search for disruption. There was none to find. I remained steady. "You seem at peace," she said almost gently as she poured herself tea. I folded the newspaper without looking up. "Peace has to come from precision." She offered a smile. "That is not what most people would say. Most people are not dealing with stolen authorship." The smile lingered, but her fingers tapped once against the cup. "I do not want this to get ugly," she said after a pause. I met her eyes. "It already got dishonest. Ugly is just the next logical step." She set the cup down carefully and walked into the other room. Later that evening, I received a message from an editor I had never spoken to directly, someone high in the publishing chain. He thanked me for the thoughtful documentation and assured me that their legal team was conducting a final ethics review before the article's rescheduled release. His tone was professional, but between the lines it was clear they were distancing themselves. Elise's narrative had started to rot from within. The next morning she sent a text while I was at the office. "Dinner tonight? Just us." I replied with a single word. "Yes." She set the table like it was an occasion, cloth napkins, real candles, a playlist full of nostalgic cues. She wore a dress I had not seen in 2 years and opened a bottle of wine we had been saving for something that never came. We sat across from one another in perfect symmetry. She picked at her food, then finally set her fork down. "I want to know where you are," she said. Emotionally, I tilted my head slightly. "Why?" "Because I can feel something changing." "It is not changing," I said. "It already changed. You are just late to the moment." She sat back slowly, her hand closing lightly around the base of her wine glass. "This story, my version, it was never meant to hurt you." "Then why did it erase me?" She swallowed. "Because presence is harder to explain than pressure. Because saying I left you is not as clean as saying I outgrew what you represented." "And what did I represent?" Her eyes stayed on mine. "A chapter I could not rewrite." The air between us cooled. She believed this would be our quiet détente, the conversation that allowed her to soften the edge, to claim mutual respect without changing the record. But I had already sent my final packet that morning. Not to her, to Loring's legal advisor. It included internal timestamps of shared decks, joint grant proposals with original metadata, and a signed contract confirming our mutual licensing agreements. I received a reply an hour after she poured the wine. They were halting the investor rollout. Lisa's agency would be listed for structural review under partnership misrepresentation. Nadine had not responded directly, but the silence was conclusive. Across from me now, Elise reached for her glass again. "We should find a way to close this gently," she said. "People are watching." I nodded. "They always have been." She studied my face, looking for a hint of strategy. She would not find it. I no longer needed to scheme. I had already won the moment. She underestimated what I had kept. Not anger, not resentment, receipts. The next morning, Elise received a call on speakerphone while she prepared coffee. The voice on the other end was tight, professional, and unfamiliar to her. "This is Margaret Leeds from Standards and Ethics at Forward Press. I wanted to inform you that the article will not proceed as originally planned." She froze, one hand still on the handle of the French press. "I was not told there would be changes." "There has been a dispute of record," Margaret continued. "We are revisiting factual attribution before publication. You will receive a summary of contested claims by end of day." Elise glanced at me, standing across the kitchen, expression unreadable. I said nothing. She ended the call without another word and placed the phone face down on the counter. "I assume you sent something." I met her gaze. "No, I sent everything." She crossed her arms slowly. "You are not interested in healing this, are you?" I kept my tone even. "You are not interested in telling it honestly." She exhaled once, then turned back to her coffee. By mid-afternoon, 2 emails arrived, one from the Loring Collective notifying us of a suspension of Elise's agency affiliation pending review, and another from Forward Press outlining the editorial halt. Both were copied to our general business address, where Elise had assumed she controlled the narrative flow. She read them in silence at her desk, posture rigid, then closed the laptop without speaking. That evening she skipped dinner. No candles, no music, just the faint hum of a disconnected world. The next day she approached me as I organized a project archive in our shared office. "I want to move my desk." I did not look up. "Then move it." She hesitated in the doorway. "I think we need to redefine our boundaries." I closed the file drawer. "We do not need to redefine anything. We just need to stop pretending." She nodded once. "You are enjoying this." "No," I said. "I am documenting it. That is the difference between ego and accountability." Her expression shifted, the mask slipping slightly, not fear but exposure. The following morning I received a message from the private investigator. His report was complete. It included not only the images of her with Nadine, but also a statement from a former colleague who had been approached by Elise to help revise the branding legacy by reassigning original credit. That was the last confirmation I needed. I did not send the report to the press. I did not forward it to her investors. I sent it to her directly, printed, bound, placed on her desk with a single note. "This is not for pressure, it is for record." She did not speak to me for 2 days, but she stopped making calls from the living room. She stopped rehearsing her lines aloud. She started moving through the house like a version of herself that no longer trusted the mirror. The fallout reached her slowly. First through colleagues who stopped responding, then through a boutique agency that withdrew an invitation to a women in leadership panel. No public shaming, just empty inboxes and missed calls. She began to crumble the way careful people do internally, with grace, but still visibly. She asked one night if I would ever forgive her. I replied without cruelty. "That was not the question you asked when you rewrote our history." She said nothing after that. She did not need to. Her story had made its way into the world, but now it had a counterbalance, not louder, not angrier, just true.